So, your question was, how did I get into publishing?
Publishing, yes.
So, I got into publishing at an early age. Comic book was sort of a hub, or comic book.
Detroit.
Detroit was a hub for comic book fandom at the time. And I met a lot of comic book guys. A lot of the 1970s comic book artists came out of Detroit, or the Metro Detroit area. Like Walt Simonson was from a nearby suburb, Jim Starlin. And then I met a group of guys whose members included Terry Austin and Richard Buckler and Keith Pollard and Arvell Jones. And in fact, Arvell was sort of the mover and shaker and one of my early mentors for my artwork. You name it, I met him. You know, Barry Smith, Neil Adams, Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, Roy Thomas, Len Wein, all these guys. And it was awesome. And, you know, I'm so around all this creative stuff. And my original goal was to be a comic book artist and writer. So I'm moving towards that goal. I'm writing comic book stories. I'm doing, you know, my own fanzines. And then in college, in 1975 and 76, Alex and I produced our own comic book, Detroit's first comic book, A+. It was a black and white anthology. That lasted through issue 5, and we had to let it go. It was a little ahead of its time, you know, for independent comics. That would hit like 10 years later, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but anyway, I sort of had publishing in my blood. And when I started my gaming at the Detroit Gaming Center, it was D&D. But I didn't like certain elements of the game. It didn't move fast enough for me. It didn't, it was very rulesy. Mm-hmm. And I really thought one of the things I loved about role-playing was character and story. You know, it's role-playing, not rules-playing. So I really started to focus on, you know, the role-playing aspect. And I started tweaking the game and changing the game. And we, you know, finally my gaming group was like, Kevin, this is great. It's really not D&D anymore. You should try to sell it as your own game. So I thought, yeah, that's a cool idea. So I shopped it around to everyone that existed at that time. And everyone turned me down except for Judges Guild. And Judges Guild said, we'll give you $500 and a 2% royalty, which would slide down, not up, slide down to 1% royalty after they sold 10,000 copies.
Wow.
And I'm like, you know, I appreciate the offer, I think. You know, I'm not giving my game away. And so I went back and told the guys, I struck out. And they're like, well, Kev, you have publishing experience. You should do it yourself. And I'm thinking, no. And they kept writing me about it, and finally I'm thinking, yeah, that's a great idea. Now, I didn't have the money to do Palladium Fantasy the way I wanted to, which is, you know, as a big, you know, softcover book. So, because that's the game I actually created first. Mm-hmm. So then I went back and I published the Mechanoids in a comic book format. It was comic book size on newsprint. I had a one-color cover. And I published that, and a buddy of mine did this little weapon book, and we went to our very first Gen Con to sell stuff. We have like a little table. We're at the university. It was still in Lake Geneva. And you know, I couldn't help noticing that for every one mechanoid that I sold, Matt is selling 5 of his little weapon pamphlet. So this is before the internet, so people didn't know what a beak axe was, or you know, exactly what is a Hercules club, and you know, a Morning Star, exactly. And so Matt was heavy into history, as well as being into role playing. So he created this little booklet that had 700 weapons illustrated very simply, but it was the damage and the stats were written in such a way they could be used for any game system.
Wow.
And after that event, I said, Matt, we need to do something with this. We need to take it, you know, to the next step. I said, how can we make this bigger? He's like, I don't know. And I said, what if we added armor to it? So we published Weapons and Armor, and that was our first quiet hit. We over the next 5 years, we'd sell 100,000 copies. Yeah.
Wow.
Plus, because it was truly historically accurate, it was in libraries, it was in schools. It was really awesome.
What year was that?
That was like, I want to say it's 1983.
Wow.
And then a buddy of mine, one of my defilers, as a matter of fact, said, hey, I got $10,000 to invest, Kevin, and tell me why I should invest in Palladium and not buy land in Alaska. And I'm like, I give him my pitch, and he's like, okay, you got it. We cut a deal, and that financed the first printing of Palladium Fantasy, and that really started to take off. And, you know, that was followed by Heroes Unlimited. And then, again, being a comic book guy, I kept hearing about Ninja Turtles. I could not get a copy of number 1. I got a copy of number 2. I read it, and I said to my wife and kids, I'm like, this would make a great role-playing game, provided we could, you know, include every kind of mutant animal. The phone rings, and it's this guy who's going, hey, I'm a Palladium fan. Have you seen this book, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? I think it would make a great role-playing game. And I said, yeah, me too. So we tracked down Eastman Laird's contact, and I called them. We hit it off. We signed a contract. They were so green at the time that they didn't know how to do a contract. And they said, you have experience. Yeah, like
Oh boy.
3-4 years. And I'm like, sure, I'll write this contract. So we read a contract. I knew the book had to appeal to comic book fans, not just gamers. So Eastman and Laird, like I said, they're as green can be. They're just a startup company. I mean, they're hot as hell, but so they were willing to do all the art for the book. They did a special like 8 or 10 page comic strip for the RPG. We priced it at $9.99 because we thought, well, it's low enough where comic book speculators might go, I want this because it's Turtles. Gamers should snap it up at that price, and it did. It got us into comic book stores, and it just took off like a rocket. So then we got Robotech.
Tell me about that.
Getting Robotech?
Yes, I'm a huge Robotech fan, so I want to know all the history.
So Robotech, it's funny because I had developed my Mega Damage concept, and I was looking for the right vehicle for it. And one of my friends and employees at the time, Richard Burke, who makes it into the game as Dr. Richard Burke, who was then carried over into the Robotech novels, which was pretty sweet. Rick was really happy about that. Rick comes to me and says, Kev, there's this great show, this animated show on TV, you got to watch it. And I'm like, great, when's it on? And he's like, oh, it's on like 3 a.m. And I'm like, I'm not going to remember to watch this at 3 a.m. even if I'm up. I got 2 little kids. And, you know, it was stupid because, you know, VHS was the new technology. And I didn't think of videotaping it for some reason. So Rick's telling me, Kevin, you got to watch this. You got to watch this. It's perfect. You're going to love it. Everything about it. It's just you. And I'm like, yeah, I'll get to it. You know, I don't know. So then it was in syndication, so it switches from like 3 or 4 a.m. to 3 or 4 p.m. And it comes on, and my kids are watching it, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, this is cool. What is this? And the first episode I happened to catch is the episode when they try to bombard Earth.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm watching this, and I'm like, this is really interesting. And there's like this little girl who reaches over with this flower to give to like a National Guardsman or a soldier.
And they are incinerated.
Well, yeah, and he's like, what's your name, little girl? And it's like, wolf, and they're incinerated. And I'm like, what is this? You know, because you never saw that kind of stuff in American cartoons. It was all aimed for kids, right? And I'm like instantly in love with this thing. We find out what it is. I'm a fan. I start collecting, you know, the whatever I can get of it. You know, all the Tatsunoko toys and all this stuff. And I'm like, and Rick is like, so Kev, you going to license it? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to license this. I want to get this. So I put together a package. I send it to Harmony Gold. I follow up with a call. The licensing agent picks up the phone. I don't even let him talk. I just hit him with my pitch. And I get done. I'm like, so what do you think? He's like, wow, that was one of the best pitches I ever heard. I would love to give you the license. And I'm like, great. He's like, but I can't. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He goes, we've been negotiating with Steve Jackson Games for like five months.
Wow.
In fact, we just sent out the contract a couple days ago. I'm expecting to get, a signed contract any time now. And I'm like, oh, I'm like crestfallen. And I'm like, God darn it, why didn't I listen to Rick? Called him frickin' 6 months ago. He's been telling me how great this is. And I'm like, okay, well, should the deal fall through, please give me a call. And he's like, it's not going to fall through. We've been working on this for months. I'm like, okay. So I'm stomping around the kitchen, calling myself names and how stupid I am, and I should have listened to Rick. And bizarrely enough, my wife, Marianne, says, I got a good feeling about this. I think they're going to call back. And I'm like, are you crazy?
Mm-hmm.
I blew it. No one's going to let this license go. 3 hours later, the guy calls back, the agent, and for Harmony Gold, and says, yeah, he goes, you won't believe this, but Steve Jackson decided to pass on it. The guy who was finagling the deal did not have the authority to do it. And when Steve saw it, Steve said, I'm not familiar with this IP, and I don't know, it's kind of pricey, and I'm not interested. So we cut the deal, and we did Robotech, and it was kind of crazy because, at first it was Carl Masek who was approving all the material we did. And the thing is, there wasn't a lot of stuff back then. Again, this is pre-internet, and there's not a lot of information. So we took Perfect Memory, or Memory Perfect, and we had a Wayne State University professor who could, translate Japanese to do translations so we could get information. And some of it was there, like, so many meters or this or that. But a lot of it was, missiles, many, or missiles, many was the translation. And I'm like, well, that doesn't help me. So we bought a high-end, at the time, what was considered a super high-end, state-of-the-art VHS recorder in which you could freeze the frames. You could tape it and then freeze it. And so we would be freezing the frames, and we'd be standing there counting the missiles that came out of this mecha or that mecha, and over and over to make sure, okay, well, this time there were 24, this time there was 32, which is it? Things that happened once we threw out, things that happened repeatedly we kept. And, we didn't have all the specifics at the time. Just like a lot of the, when we did Southern Cross, there was hardly any information at all on that. Macross was the big popular anime. So, and for those who may not be aware, Robotech combines 3 different Japanese animes: Macross, Southern Cross, and Mospita. And Carl Masek was brilliant in that he said, so they couldn't just do Macross, because in those days, syndication, you had to have like 62 or 64 episodes. And Macross, I want to say, is like 36 or 38. And so what Masek did is said, well, let's span this story across 3 generations of Earth defenders against alien invasion. And he did a reasonably good job.
It was genius.
And it was pretty ingenious. I think certain parts of it worked better than others. I'm not a big Southern Cross fan myself. I didn't.
No Robotech without Southern Cross.
But you're right, absolutely. So when we go to write the Southern Cross book, there's no information. So I just invented this whole what we called EBSIS, Eastern Bloc something, and used a bunch of the Southern Cross robots and armor for that. So I mean, that's just like totally out there. It's like some weird alternate universe, but there was no information about it at the time. And Invasion was easier. That was pretty accurate by us, but and the fans just ate it up. And plus, at the time, because there's no internet, at the time they were calling it Japanimation.
Yeah.
So anime is the flow is really uneven. The availability of the toys is really uneven. And
for years, the only Robotech we had was the RPG.
For a lot of people. And that's the thing, is because I loved it and I was a fan myself, and so was Kevin Long and Alex and everybody. We wanted to make it as accurate as we could, and we tried to be as true to it as we could. And we became the de facto experts on Robotech, even over Harmony Gold. And Harmony Gold, after like the Southern Cross, actually, I think before the Southern Cross book, we did a couple source books, Zentradi source book and the RDF manual.
Mm-hmm.
And after those came out, Harmony Gold could see we loved it and we're trying to be accurate. So at some point, you know, the person I would send all this stuff in for approval, because Carl moved on to do other things shortly after we got the license, said, you know, we barely even look at your stuff. We kind of rubber stamp it because we know it's really good. And I'm like, oh, thanks. So the McKinneys, who wrote the novels,
James Lucerno and someone else.
Right, it was actually two guys.
One of them passed. Yeah,
unfortunately.
Can't remember his name though.
Yeah, something Italian, like Giacano or something like that. I think.
I'll post the name up in post.
They're both really nice guys. They call me up and they're like, can we buy books from you because we can't get information? And I'm like, yeah, buy. I said, I'll send them to you. I'll give them to you. So at one point, like one of their first novels, early novels, they both signed it and sent it to me. And I think it got lost over years, unfortunately. But they were using our books as, you know,
reference,
part of their reference library. Which was pretty neat, and that's how Richard Burke, who as an homage to Rick Burke, my friend, who turned us on, I put him as a character in the book, and they took him and put him in the novel because he was in one of our early source books, I think RDF Manual.
Nice.
So yeah, it was pretty cool that my buddy got immortalized.
It's good to have crossover too, but yeah, that's awesome for your buddy.
You know, and it just, you know, took off. You know, we did Sentinels, and then Live Entertainment kind of fumbled the ball with the release of Robotech on VHS around 1988. And what they did is they didn't realize how dedicated the fandom was. So to make it fit in a collected set, all the episodes of Macross, they would trim out 30 seconds here, a minute there, a minute and a half here, and the fans went wild. How could you do this? You're butchering, you know, Robotech. You clearly you don't care about it. And so it was just this whole debacle for them. So out of the blue, I get this call one day from like the vice president of Live Entertainment, the company that did it. And he says, you know, we really dropped the ball on this. We really do care about the fan base. We really do want people to get these VHS tapes. But our name is Mud. So, you know, we hear great things about your role-playing products. Kevin, if you want to do this, we will sub-license this to you for the rest of our contract, except it's only like 18 or 20 months. And I'm like, take it. Never did a VHS anything in my life, and I'm like, I'll take it. So we get the tapes and things, the originals to work from, and we tracked down a really good company to mass produce them in Chicago. Because again, I wanted high quality. Kevin Long starts doing art for the covers and some other artists as well. And the very first thing we released is Sentinels, because I thought it'd be cool because no one's ever seen it.
Yes.
So Sentinels was Harmony Gold's first attempt at continuing the series. And they had done like 3 or 6 episodes. And they had cut them into one big long episode when they couldn't get the project greenlighted. And they were hoping that release as video would pique interest, and they would be able to convince, you know, the people who pull the purse strings to let them produce a new Robotech series. So we release Sentinels. I'm calling all my distributors, and it's in the heyday of distribution. We have 72 distributors. I call up all of them. One orders 26 copies. everyone else tells me, sorry, Kevin, we're in the business of doing role-playing games, not selling, VHS tapes. And I'm like, okay. And we had paid a lot of money for this. And my wife was like, oh no. This is, because Palladium was just really taking off, and this could be really bad for us, right? And I said, don't worry about it. I said, I know the fans want this stuff. So we started putting ads in Dragon Magazine and a couple other places, I think Marvel Comics. And I said, we'll just sell it ourselves. So, man, all of a sudden the orders are pouring in. And meanwhile, as word spreads, distributors, their fan base is saying, hey, how come you're not carrying this? You carry all Palladium stuff. Why can't we get the Robotech tapes? And so distributors start calling me up, and it was crazy because they're like, Kev, how could you do this to us? Cut us out. And I'm like, wait a minute. I offered it to you guys. You said you don't carry videotapes. And I'm like, okay, we were wrong. We need the videotapes. And I'm like, look, I just said in all my ads, only available directly from Palladium via mail order. They're like, but please, Kevin, please. So we cut that short. We started selling to them, and it just sold like crazy. It took off. We were one of the original, we're kind of forgotten now, but we were one of the big movers and shakers with releasing anime, in the late 80s.
So how many copies of the Sentinels do you think you sold?
Around, I want to say 40,000. It was a lot. There was one point where we had so many releases out that out of like 10 new anime releases, we were 7 of them in the top 10 selling animes. In fact, our number one distributor at the time, Capital City Comics, said, what's your next anime project? And I said, well, none. And they're like, what do you mean none? You're pioneering this this new trend, and you got to continue. I'm like, well, no, we're a role-playing game company, and I just knew our fans would love this, and I saw an opportunity, and so we released it, and we're focusing back on role-playing games, and a good thing too, because we came out with Beyond the Supernatural, and then we came out with Rifts.
Tell me the rest of the Palladium story.
How much time you got?
Well, tell me about the ascent. How you really. I mean, because Rifts, Robotech, that time. I mean, that's when me and most of my friends became fans. So, in my imagination, it must have been like Lightspeed for you, right?
It pretty much was. We it's funny. I recently did a projection of Palladium's growth, and it went basically like just up, and through the 80s up through the mid 90s, and it was pretty meteoric and it was pretty exciting. So Palladium Fantasy did well. The Weapon series was our quiet first mega hit. But even Palladium Fantasy, in the first 10 years, we sold over 100,000 copies of just the RPG itself. Same for Heroes Unlimited. Ninjas and Super Spies wasn't quite that popular, but close. So we had one hit after another, and then when we did Turtles, we really started to skyrocket. And that was sort of deliberate. Not only did I love it, but I knew it could open doors for us and get us into mom and pop comic book stores. And it did. And then following that up a year later with Robotech, cemented that comic book world connection. So we were really taking off. And then we did, like I said, Beyond the Supernatural. And my magnum opus was Rifts. And I kept saying, I want to make this my Star Wars. Not like Star Wars, but epic like Star Wars. In a unique world. That was one of the crazy things too early on. Well, even after Robotech, people are telling me, Kevin, people want generic worlds. And I'm like, they don't. I said, Turtles is selling like crazy. Robotech is selling like crazy. I'm going to do this fabulous original world that I just had all these ideas for. And some of them, inspired by the material we put into Beyond the Supernatural when I was working with my co-author, Randy McCall. And, so a lot of the several elements from beyond the supernatural are found in riffs, like ley lines and places of power, and you know how PPE works and all that. And so I spent like 3.5 years on riffs, and Kevin Long, you know, one of my co-conspirators, was really excited about it, did magnificent artwork for it along with other art contributors, but Long just really knocked it out of the park. He and I were so excited about Robotech, or excuse me, riffs, and in fact, after working on it for 3.5 years, I wasn't sure anymore if it was as great as I thought it was originally. And Kevin Long is the only one who just like, Kev, you're gonna sell 5,000 of these in the first, you know, month. And I'm like, I mean, if it sold like Turtles, because Turtles was our first big hit, and we sold 10,000 copies in 3 months. And I'm like, if we sell 3,000 copies of Riffs in 3 months, I will be thrilled out of my mind. But I had no idea what we were going to do. So we go to Gen Con. It debuts at Gen Con in 1990. And the printer couldn't get it done in time for Gen Con. So we actually stop at the printer while they're printing it. It's literally rolling off the press.
Wow.
We get 350 copies to take to us with to Gen Con. And we were sold out by Saturday afternoon. And I knew we had a hit because you see people walking around. I had people coming back going, oh my God, this is great. I've read half the book. I was up all night. And I'm like, okay, awesome. And we sold out our first 10,000 copies in 3 weeks.
Wow.
We printed 20,000 copies. That sold out in a month and a half. We printed another 20,000 copies. That sold out in 3 months. We sold like 46,000 copies in the first 10 or 12 months.
How many of the original Rifts book do you think you've sold, or do you know?
I don't know the exact number, but it's over 350,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's been, I mean, there's like almost 100 Rifts titles.
Yeah.
And I don't think that counts like the novels. So yeah, it's been our biggest hit. It even outdid Robotech and Turtles. So it was pretty amazing. And as you can imagine, you know, in the early 90s, we had Ninja Turtles, Robotech, and Riffs. So yeah, we were
Nice.
flying pretty high.
Sitting pretty. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
Just that, you know, we've had our ups and downs, and you know, we recently brought Sean Owen Robertson into the company to help carry it on, to help me rebuild it. And
When did you bring him on?
last September.
Excellent.
And
Met him, swell guy.
yeah, he's a great guy. He became the line editor for Riffs. We licensed Riffs to Pinnacle Entertainment, the Savage Worlds people. And they did a Riffs with the Savage Worlds rules. And Sean rose and rose and rose within that and became the line editor, our manager. And he was doing such a great job. The more I talked to Sean, I'm thinking, man, this guy has the same passion. He has the same vision. You know, he's 20 years younger. This is the guy to help me continue Palladium books after, you know, I retire or get hit by a bus or, you know, whatever. Because, I mean, let's face it, I'm getting up there. This is real white hair. So, you know, I wish I could say bleach my hair. It's a platinum blonde. But,
Silver Fox, that's what they say.
There you go. So yeah, I think Sean's the guy who's going to help continue our legacy, and we've got big plans. We're putting all kinds of things into place. We hope that you know, our fans will be seeing, you know, releases much more frequently. A lot of the books they've been waiting for a number of years have been delayed for one reason or another, the pandemic and other stuff. And yeah, we're already seeing the results of that. I mean, we released Riff's Coalition Manhunters. We've got a couple new raw editions out. Creature Feature will be coming. We brought back the Rifter, which was a quarterly publication. It's now an annual. And that was Sean's first project to do Rifter number 85, and it's great. And we have big plans. You ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been an honor meeting you, and thank you for your time. Palladium Open House has been a blast. It's my first one, and just happy to be here. Thanks again.
Thanks for coming.